Welcome to our new member virtual tasting. My name is Madeline Schmall, and during the day you'll find me looking after our SMWS UK community on social media. Welcome. You are now part of a global community of 37,000 members. This tasting is designed to introduce you to the society and give you a flavour of what we're all about. But this tasting isn't just about us, it's about you and your society experience. So please ask us questions, give us your tasting notes, and let us know where you're tuning in from. Before I introduce you to your hosts for tonight, let's take a quick look at the running order of tonight's drams. So first up, we'll start with cask 113.35, Lemons on the Lawn. Next up, it'll be 134.13, Citrus Moscatel Sangria. Next up, it's cask 5.81, a fruity prescription, followed by cask 68.87, Gooey, Nutty and Buttery. Last but not least, 53.409, The Naked Truth, Puzzling Delightful, which is quite hard to say, actually. In your tasting pack, you will find a small envelope. It has these tasting notes in it, which will have the details for each dram and help keep you right. Now, due to the limited edition nature of our whiskies, we're sadly not able to offer you the chance to purchase full bottles of all the whiskies tonight. That being said, we do have a bottle of cask number 134.13 Citrus Moscatel Sangria. If you enjoy any of our other flavour profiles this evening, we have a special £10 discount code for you, the details of which were shared in your member email with your tasting notes. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to your ambassadors for the evening. First up, we have Lee Connor.
Evening all, are we well?
How you doing?
Oh, fantastic, Mads. It's great to be back online again.
I've made
good, I'm so unused to it. I forgot to get myself some water. So anybody watching out there wants to try the whiskey with water, maybe go and grab some now while we're introducing.
That's a great shout. And I'm going to just jump over and introduce Olaf Meyer, our other ambassador for the evening. Hey, Olaf, how you doing?
Very well. Good evening. Good evening. Seems a long time that we've done this, but no, looking forward to it.
It's been a wee while. But Olaf, I believe you're going to tell us a bit more about the origin story of the society. So we'll kick things off before we start on the first dram. Over to you.
Well, we've got a Moin from Hamburg, Grüß Gott, nach Hamburg. I've been an ambassador, well, I've been with the society since 1992. I actually had to, in those days, you couldn't become a member outside of the United Kingdom. And I'm a German, and I lived in Germany at the time. So I had to forge a UK address to become a member. I wasn't in the first lot because the society started in 1983. That's why we're celebrating 40 years this year. And it was Pip Hills and a few of his friends, which decided after having tried single cask, single malt Scotch whiskey, that that's the stuff one really should be having. So first of all, he started off in his flat in Scotland Street in Edinburgh. And then friends came, and all of a sudden they decided, let's have a club. And they started off in 1983 in September, October time with the Scotch Malt Whisky Society in the Vaults, which is still home away from home. And really thinking about all this, it's been a time, 1983, if you look back, the whiskey industry was in dire straits. I mean, sort of many distilleries had to be closed over the period of the beginning of the 80s. There was oversupply of stock as well. So it couldn't have been a worse time to pick if you wanted to start a society. But here we are 40 years later, still going strong and going stronger than ever. It's fascinating to see. And Pip Hills, who's been around with us now for the last 40 years, off and on, but is now back in the fold, so to speak, and really enjoying the society as we are moving into our 40th year.
Brilliant. I mean, it's a really exciting time. I'm sure everyone's been seeing all of the great stories that have been coming out. We went back up to Aberdeenshire with Pip. Our editor Richard Goslin was there. There's a great video of that, and of course all of the recent Maverick stories as well around the Maverick bottling. So if you haven't seen those yet, make sure you check them out.
Yep. No, it's a story you think, hang on, it can't be true, but it is true. I mean, sort of that's the wonderful thing about it.
Excellent.
should we move on to number one?
Yeah, I think now's a good time to start.
Yeah. We start with lemons on the lawn. So there we go. You're ahead of me. I haven't yet poured it, so I'll pour that right now.
Well, just say hello to Drew and Orv and Ethan and Aaron, who are all joining us from Germany, Edinburgh, York, and Ayr.
Yeah, I had my first bed and breakfast in Scotland in Ayr. Shall I tell you? Yeah, I'll tell you. 1983. I was 5 years old when I was there. No, I wish I would be. No, I wasn't. So here we are, the first one. So it's the 113.35. We in the society, right from the beginning, said we don't really worry about what distillery it is, because being a single cask is very different to a single malt. Because when you buy a single malt whiskey, you finish the bottle, you buy the next one, you expect it to be the same, because it has to be, because that's the brands. You can only build a brand on continuity. Now, we're just the opposite. We want diversity. So therefore, right from the beginning, Pip Hills and his friends said, no, we're not going to tell you what a distillery is. In the olden days, it was a big secret what a distillery is. Nowadays, of course, thanks to internet, nothing's a secret anymore. But we'll still stick with it, because it really doesn't matter. So what is the number? The 113 is basically the 113th distillery which we have bottled. So when Pip started, it was 1.1, the first distillery, the first cask. Now, this is the 113th distillery we bottled, and it's the 35th cask from the 113th distillery. There's no logic why 113 is 113. It just came after 112 and before 114. So don't look for logic in the society, because there isn't any logic. So here we are with this from the 113th, 35th cask. We called it light and delicate from our flavor profile. So that's the 12 flavor profile we're having. And look at the color already. It is not just light and delicate in the flavor as before, but also very light in the color. I'm always recommending people not to read the tasting note if you've got the whiskey in front of you, because you can try it and then you can nose it and taste it, as we will do in a second, and then read the tasting note. But I'll have to give you one warning, because on the back of that tasting note, it actually gives you a wrong distill date. It says the 30th of May 2001, but in fact, it was the 30th of September 1997. And that's what you normally see on the bottles. So you see the number, you see the title of it, and we'll talk about that later. And then you see which cask it was in, and you see the distillation date, and you see the alcohol level. So the alcohol level being 57.8%, which actually is quite a lot given that it is 22 years old. A light color gives an indication that the cask probably hasn't done that much. And it is a refill ex-bourbon hogshead. So refill, because we use in Scotland mainly second-hand casks, either American oak, ex-bourbon, or sherry casks from Spain, European oak. So this one, set in American oak cask, but also a refill. That means quite a few times it's been used before this whiskey goes in. So with no further ado, I think you've already nosed it. You've probably already drunk it, but I'll nose it. It noses very, very, really light and delicate. I mean, I certainly wouldn't say it's 57.8% if I know that on the nose. I would say a lot less. A lot of green grass, a lot of floral notes, a little bit of citrus as well. But a very pleasant, very pleasant. What do you think, Connors?
Yeah, I mean, exactly what it says on the tin in this case. Sometimes I agree with the tasting notes, sometimes I don't. But this one, they may as well have just extracted them straight from my head counters. I'm getting a little bit of that my mate petrichor, that kind of smell after summer rain.
Yep.
In there as well. I'm just going to have a little taste on the palate.
Yeah. So do I. Mm-hmm.
A lot more fresh and zesty and
and suddenly singing.
Almost,
The
yeah,
alcohol
singing,
is
that's the
there
word.
now. The alcohol
Yeah,
is present, and
it wasn't
Still
before,
quite
it is now.
buttery though, I would
yeah,
say.
Mm.
There's definitely a butteriness to the spirit.
yeah, quite a creaminess to it as well.
Mm.
You're right. You're right. The thing is, we leave it at cask strength, which means it's up to you if you want to dilute it or not. So it's up. You can do whatever you like. There's nothing wrong and nothing correct. Usually, when you buy whiskey in the shop, it will be diluted down to 40%. The reason for that is one simple answer: money, as it very often is, because 40% is the legal limit. You can sell Scotch whiskey as Scotch whiskey. And therefore the tax is the lowest because the tax is based on the level of alcohol. But as we don't want to sell, I think the latest number was 1.6 billion bottles of Scotch whiskey were sold last year. We're not in the business, not yet anyway, of selling that much. We're actually in the business for this one to sell 237 bottles. So the number gets a bit smaller than the 1.6 billion. And therefore we leave it at cask strength for you to decide if you want to add some water or not. Now, for the nose, I thought this was very, very tame, very friendly, very open, but I get a little bit of bite on the back. And therefore, I've got my good old water jug from the society, which is my noggin. Good old noggin. Normally, it shouldn't be water in there. It should be whiskey in there, but I'll have some water in there. It's just a sort of... Now, the million-dollar question always is, how much water should you be adding? And again, there's no right and there's no wrong. If you liked it, actually, leave it like that. But still listen, because you might need it for number 2, 3, 4, or indeed number 5. So start with little, because you can't take it out. So if you just want to add a drop of water, just wait. Bit of lime cordial, yeah, I'm getting that as well. That is that citrusy sort of note, that sort of pineapple grapefruit as well.
While we're talking about flavour, Olaf, we've had quite a good question come in, which is, what is the most popular flavour profile? Which I feel like that's a hard question to answer.
Actually, it's not, Matt, because the one go-to, and it's because flavour profiles are hard, because what is sweet, fruity, and mellow is something spicy and sweet for someone else, or spicy and dry. It is quite difficult, because we're talking diverse flavors, and then we'll put it back into 12 flavor profiles. So it's not ideal by any stretch of the imagination, but it's the best thing we really have. And I think it's a very, very good thing to have. And it just gives you some sort of indication where you're going. So, Matt, I'm a chairperson of the panel. So I've been doing this for 20 years now in the society. And I can tell you one thing. The most discussion we have is the flavor profile at the end of it, to decide where to put it in. And quite frankly, if we're not really for sure, it's going into spicy and sweet. So therefore, the most popular flavor profile, or popular, for now the most often used, is spicy and sweet. I can tell you one thing, in terms of popularity, it's difficult to say. I mean that there is obviously, if you like peated whiskies, then you've got 3 flavor profiles for that. Old and dignified is one. I can tell you certainly which is the least popular one, which is spicy and dry. That's the least popular one in terms of the society. Yeah,
that's really interesting. I try to encourage everyone to, as you said earlier, Olaf, there's not really any way of telling what you think about the whiskey until you've tried it. That's what it comes down to. I really enjoy doing blind tastings and not telling anybody what they're drinking until the end. You get to find out a lot of different things about people, and maybe some of the biases that they may have had. And, you send them on a bit of a journey instead of saying, well, this is how it has to be. It's not like that at all. It's a journey, not a destination.
I'd agree with that as well, because in terms of, you look at the flavor profiles on paper, I know when I started with the society, I looked at them and I said, okay, on paper, deep, rich and dried fruits, that's going to be the whiskey for me. And then I tried it and I was just like, oh no, this isn't the whiskey for me. This isn't the flavor profile for me. So they are very deliberately broad brush strokes, and you kind of have to try all 12, I think, before you can say this one's my favorite. And that'll change throughout your whiskey journey as well.
I was just about to say, Madeline, that's exactly it. It's going to change, and it depends as well on the season. Like now, it's winter, it's cold, so you might go for some deep, rich and dried fruit or peated ones. And for example, this one for me would be a lovely summer whiskey. I mean, sort of just sitting outside, sort of and enjoying it, because it's got that freshness, it got that citrus flavor as well. And for me, yeah, as I say, I would have that one. Well, we're all looking forward to it. A bit more warmer, a bit more sunny, and that would be my Dram. Also, talking about the color as well, because as you can see as well in the samples, most of them are slightly lighter in color than you probably would expect it, because we don't add color to our whiskey. Again, unfortunately, if you go into, well, unfortunately, if you live in Great Britain, not because you live in Great Britain, but talking at bottles, because there is normally sugar caramel being added to make it that lovely amber color, which everyone thinks whiskey has to be looking like. You can't see it in the UK because labeling laws don't say you have to have it on there. But whenever you travel to Germany, France, or Spain, turn the bottle around and you can see in the local language it's going to say with sugar caramel. We just leave it as it is, so we don't want to add anything. We don't want to take anything out either, so we're not chill filtering, which also is something. When you add some water to it, it might go a little bit cloudy. Don't worry, that's good news, because that means your whiskey has not been chill filtered before it goes from the cask into the bottle. And and obviously we don't add water to it, so we leave it pretty much as if you would be in a warehouse and you would just get it straight out of the cask. We'll remove the char and the wood bits for you, but that's as far as we go. I've added some water to it now, and the nose really opened up for me. I mean, it actually even shows a bit its age now on the nose for me. Before that, it was quite youngish, I thought, but now it's got depth. Got some grassy notes again, got some marzipan, pineapple. And now I'll give it a try. Much better for me. Now I can keep it in the mouth, it doesn't burn. I can swallow it and it doesn't burn. And now I can really look at the flavors and sort of say, I do like this whiskey, or maybe I don't like it. But I can tell you one thing, I do love this whiskey. It's, I mean, that's really, again, as I say, it's up to you with water. Don't look at it as a numbers game. So a 60% alcohol whiskey doesn't need necessarily more water than a 50%. People always trying to find easy answers. No, experiment. That's the fun of it.
Yeah, that's sort of conversation about water and whiskey. It's not a new one. I mean, again, it's down to you and how you like it. And it's also a good thing to mention that it doesn't always improve the whiskey. It's a matter of taste. I mean, I'm a bit of a nerd. I look into all the science of it. And the bottom line is there are things in all different whiskies that affect flavour. Some of those things are soluble in water, some aren't. So if you pop some water in there, the soluble ones will come to the fore. And, you'll taste more of them. Whether they are the ones that you like is another question altogether. So again, it's all about experimentation. I always say try it first. And if you think there's something a bit off, or it could be better, then just pop a couple of drops of water in. If it is, great. If it isn't, well, you've lost nothing, have you?
And we've got Anne Bingham who's joined in here. Hey Anne, it's good to see you. And she actually, during one of the very first virtual tastings we did, told me that when she gets her Dram packs, she splits the sample in half, so she's half with water and half neat, and that way you can really see the difference. You can also do it, of course, if you've got a full-size bottle at home. It's a really good thing to look at and experiment with, also because you don't need to drink each dram the full amount as we go through these drams. Let it sit in the glass, because it will change, and as you try the other whiskies, your perception of them will change as well. So it's absolutely having a bit worth having a bit of whiskey in the glass to come back to, and your favorite may change throughout the evening as well.
I always enjoy doing. Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I always enjoy doing tastings with people who are maybe a little bit new to whiskey, and I always say what Madeline's just said. Save some as you go along, and you'll get one or two who don't. And my magic trick is when I start, I write something on a bit of paper and give it to someone in the audience, and at the end, I'll ask them what their favorite was, and everyone will put their hand up, and it's never number one, basically, because the palate's not ready for it yet. Doesn't mean that number one's better or worse or indifferent compared to the rest of the whiskies. And I tell the guy to take the piece of paper out, read it out. Number one won't win, because it just never does. It's one of those little anomalies that you've got to challenge people with. And for some reason, people think there are set rules with whiskey. It has to be a certain thing, and it's not like that at all. It's a bit sad, really. We need to get the messaging right, I think.
The problem as well is, if number one would be your best or something, then the problem is because you always compare, automatically. You shouldn't compare because every whiskey is its own. It's just like, you meet three people. You shouldn't compare those three people. They're just characters on their own right. But automatically you're going to have the second one. You say, that isn't as good as the first one or something, and therefore, if the first one is the best one, I mean, it's a hard craft. But if the first, it's just funny how it works. But I agree with you. Yeah. I mean, I've done over 20 years tastings. First one usually never wins. No.
Yep.
But also, it's a long time you've had it, so it's an hour past or something as well. So.
Yeah. Well, we can put it to the test tonight. But I think it's probably a good time to talk about more unusual things, unusual events, unusual virtual tastings and collaborations, and Dram number 2. Which is 134.13 citrus moscatel sangria.
Absolutely. So everyone, you have your little tasting note there. You have all the information on it, on the whiskey there. Basically, we're going to do the same thing that Olaf showed us to do. We're going to give it a nose. If you're not used to drinking whiskey, if maybe you're looking for a bit more of an insight as to how to gauge where your palate's going, do the opposite of what Olaf just said and maybe compare it to some of the flavors that you were having before. And don't just think, well, this is better or this is worse. Just think what's different and kind of judge it on your mood as you are now. So, wow. On the nose there, the first thing I thought actually was toasted coconut when I first put my nose in there. But underneath that coconut, there is some kind of, I wouldn't say waxy, but more or less gooey fruit from kind of fruit pastels.
I get grapes almost like fresh grapes, but the really big ones with seeds.
Yes.
I get sweet grapes, sort of those which you get these days. What are they called? There are some really sweet grapes. I can't remember now what the name is.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking now. When you said sweet grapes, I've just gone to kind of dried fruits, prunes.
Yeah.
Specifically. So
honey as well. Honey is there. There's a
honey's there. Star fruit and Asian pear. Drew was saying there. Guys, by all means, get asking questions. Any comments you have about what the whiskey tastes like or anything like that, hang them into the chat there. We'll see you.
Ruby Port.
Oh, pour it.
Yes. Well done, Connor. Great name. So I'm going to take a little drink now. It's hard to be polite at that point, isn't it? So I'm finding that a little bit more fruit forward with the palate there. It's not as kind of what was the word that you used there? Zingy as the last one. It's kind of more rounded.
It is.
Those kind of coconut flavors are there, but on the finish there is a little bit more of a sort of pleasant little burn that isn't quite as sharp as the finish on the previous dram. You may have noticed, by the way, that this particular dram isn't from Scotland. It's actually from a place called Gooey, which is in India. More on that later. We do have kind of, a huge range of different spirits that we get from all over the world, not just whiskey. But what we're talking about at the minute is kind of how we attempt and how we try and bring the society's ethos alive. Although we were, and there's no kind of getting away from this, we were founded on the idea of single malt Scotch whiskey from a single cask. We do much more than just bottle it and sell it to you. We got all kinds of events going on with food, pairings. We did Pearl Dram a while ago, which was whiskey and caviar. We have a Scotch whiskey ice cream. We've done distillery visits outside of the society. Last year, we were at the Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery down in Filey Bay and up at Clydeside. We even kind of reach out and work with other kind of producers in the drinks industry. We've got collaborations in the past with Wasted Degrees and Tempest Brewery. I myself did a pairing tasting in Newcastle. I think it was a year ago in October in Brinkburn Street Brewery down here. And it's not always just a case of us coming and preaching to you about what we do. We have friends. We've been around for 40 years. So on these virtual tastings, you'll find people like Richard Patterson, who was commonly known as the Nose. He's a bit of a celebrity in the industry, along with people like Jim McEwen and all kinds of industry legends, as we call them, getting involved, who have actual mainstream, if you like, experience of the whiskey industry, instead of being all kind of maverick cells out here doing all sorts of crazy things. So what do we think of that, Dram, guys?
It's great. Before we jump into that, I'm just gonna hop on and answer a question quickly.
Okay.
We have the account Prince Rupert's dog has joined us from the Netherlands. They've asked about the tasting kit. We will actually have this tasting kit in Benelux, and there'll be a tasting mid-March. So keep an eye out for it, and you'll be able to join in then. And also we had a question about the whiskey, but let's try it first. You guys talk about your tasting notes, and then after that, let's jump to the question, which is about, is it unusual to get an Indian whiskey of this age as it is such a hot climate? So tasting notes first, and then jump on the question.
Well, yeah, I'm just looking at some of the tasting notes coming in here from various places. Cinnamon and soft spices, absolutely. We've had somebody say my Evoke Barb chili kick. I think I get where you're coming from there. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's an experiential thing. So what you've kind of perceived today may not be right at the front of what you perceive the next time you try it. As Mads was saying, things change, your mood changes, the ambient temperature changes, etc. So it's not just a case of it tastes like what it tastes like now. It does evolve. Anything to add to that there, Olaf, Mads?
No, just regarding the question with the age, because quite interesting. Most Indian whiskey, as a matter of fact, would be quite young in age if it is fully matured in India. The problem is the hot climate. Well, not the problem, but the issue is the hot climate, because you're getting a lot more interaction with the wood. The so-called angel share as well, which you might have heard of, which everyone says is 2%, which actually no cask is going to lose 2%. It's an average over the whole year, over the whole casks which are maturing. Actually, a number which I always love to tell people, 22 million casks of Scotch whisky is maturing in Scotland. So that's 5 million Scots, and there's 22 million casks in Scotland. It's a good ratio. I like that one. So no, so you're losing a lot more. You're losing a lot more in places like in India, but also, for example, in Kentucky, in bourbon country as well. Or if you go down to the Caribbean and you're talking Jamaican rum, for example, you're losing a lot more. But what you're actually losing, you're losing a lot more water than alcohol. In Scotland, the alcohol level goes down over the years, whereby in those countries the alcohol level actually rises slowly over the years.
Just because of the humidity,
Yes.
It messes with my head, that.
Yes, it does. But I mean, it's quite fascinating because you've got here both refill bourbon, one's being the hogshead, so slightly bigger cask. Hogshead is just a name for a size of a cask, which is about 250 liters. A barrel is about 200 liters, 180 to 200 liters. You can see as well, we've got 188 bottles out of the second one, 237 of the first one. So again, it's only 5 years. So a lot has been lost in those 5 years. And with 57.1% is actually very similar to the first one, 57.8. But I can get that chili kick as well. That's why I've added a few drops of water. And as soon as you put those in, for me, really those mellowness coming in, because I always have to laugh when people say it's mellow. What is mellow at 57.1% alcohol? So I've added a few drops of water, and to me now it really is that lovely sweet fruity mellowness. I love the way how Aaron says it smells very oaky, because that's exactly what it is. It's got that very much more wood contact, and therefore even after, so just imagine that would be in for another 5 years, it would just basically, the wood would just dominate.
Manduga honey, sorry,
go ahead.
Manduga honey has just came across my palate there.
Yeah,
Matt Henderson says he's got a hint of grappa, which I get that as well. Interesting question that's also come in the meantime. What whiskey glass would you say is best for sampling whiskey? So I think we can see that we all have slightly different tasting glasses. I think Olaf and I might be the same, but Connor,
I'm going on brand, of course. I mean,
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is obviously down to preference and what you enjoy. But I will say there are certain types of glasses where you can maybe have a different experience with that type of glass. And I will let Olaf or Connor, who wants to take this one?
Well, I'm happy to go with that. That's
right. Go ahead.
You know, a lot of people, think, as I was saying before, like there's some sort of formula to enjoying whiskey. And, you've got to do it like the professionals do it. Something that I learned, and it took me a long time to kind of get this concept into my head, is that some people are drinking the whiskey or tasting the whiskey to assess it. Assessing it doesn't necessarily equate to enjoying it. They're two different things. A guy at the end of a production line in a factory has to assess something to make sure it's all right. He doesn't necessarily like the product that comes off it, but he has to put the tick in the box. So if you're assessing whiskey, then, something with that kind of shape at the top of it, we call it a tulip head shape glass, will funnel some, of the aromas up towards your nose and your face. And, it will help you. I mean, you can try it side by side. If you have a tumbler or a highball glass or whatever handy, you will notice that you can smell a little bit more on the tulip head shaped glass than the tumbler. Having said that, if you're comfortable sat in front of the television with a tumbler on your knee, then you're comfortable with a tumbler on your knee. There's nothing wrong with that. And again, it's down to your approach, what you feel like, and why you're drinking the whiskey at the end of the day.
Yep, I think that's very true. It's sort of appreciating whiskey and enjoying whiskey, I always sort of put it, if you really want to look into it and delve into it, which you should be doing as well, then yes, you need a glass. I mean, as I say, I mean, I'm such a nerd. I've probably got about 20 or 25 different whiskey glasses at home. And they make a difference. They truly make a difference. There's no doubt about it. I mean, depending on the flavors, depending how big the flavors are as well. Like, for example, if you have a really big flavorsome whiskey, glasses which are lipping out at the top as well, for example, because then when you drink it, it's sort of going immediately on your tongue, all of it. So there's lots and lots of things. But Connor, you said exactly the right thing for me, is the one you feel the most comfortable with. Yeah, because it's all about handling as well. They're keeping it in your hand. Now my fingers are bent with this glass because I've been holding it for 30 years or something. So therefore, I feel very comfortable with it. And it's that comfort as well at the end of the day, which is key. Are you getting really the last bit of aromas out of it, of a different glass? Well, that's what it is. But no, feel comfortable with it. And again, if you wanna experiment and nose it and really appreciate it, then the glass, as Connor said, sort of a tulip-shaped glass, a small sherry glass, a small white wine glass, that will all do it at the end of the day. So you don't have to go out and buy expensive glasses to start off with. If you are a nerd like me, you will do it automatically. But you've got 30 years to do that.
Well, I mean, I think the thing is, as well, as Connor said, try it, experiment. I mean, what you can do is take the same whiskey, take 4 different types of glasses, take a tumbler, take one that's, a sherry glass, a wine glass, maybe one of the Society Copita style glasses, put the same dram in each glass and see what your experience of that dram is and how it changes the experience for you. And you'll be on the right path.
No, Madeleine, we did this actually in one of the Unfiltered. I mean, way back, sort of 10 years ago or something, there was quite a nice article, The Perfect Serve. It was me and some members up in Queen Street. And it was exactly that. I mean, sort of, and fascinating what came out of there. So an article, Madeleine, I'm sure you can find somewhere and put a link onto it.
Indeed. Yeah, no, I can. I'm going to jump on and answer some of the questions here briefly. Prince Rupert's dog again. A question about age. In EU and UK, there is rule of minimum of 3 years old, but in the USA, there is no minimum age. Can a whiskey from the States under 3 years old export it to the UK or EU and still call it whiskey?
Ooh, that's a good one. I believe as long as they don't claim that it's from Scotland or indeed the EU and it's clearly labelled. For example, in America, corn whiskey is unaged altogether. It comes out like what we call new make spirit, or they may refer to it as white dog. But basically, as long as they're clear on the label and it gets past the checks, then I would imagine they'd be allowed to do that, because you can buy corn whiskey in the UK that's been unaged. But I would encourage you to look that up on some kind of political rules thing.
I mean, certainly bourbon has very, very strict rules anyway as well, like in the US as well. Yeah. So again, don't quote me on it, but it's something like, if it's under 2 years or something, it needs to have the age on it, for example. And if it's over 2 years, it not necessarily needs it. Yeah. And it's all that sort of thing. So I guess the US rules would then also be in the EU rules. I mean, the thing about 3 years, I'm not even really sure if it would be an EU rule, because I think the UK, obviously the Scotch whiskey has that clear rule, which is there, and I think most other countries just took that rule over as such. But I don't think it's even legal in most countries. I don't know if a German whiskey or French whiskey needs to be 3 years old to be actually called whiskey. After
talking to my good friend Joe Clark at Spirit of Yorkshire when I was there. It does apply in the EU. It is only 3 years. Uh-huh. What I meant to do after I asked them about was go and have a look at some of the European distilleries that are doing American-style whiskies, such as rye or bourbon or corn or so on and so forth, and see if the same rule applies to that as well. Yeah. I didn't get round to it though. I'll put it on the list for tomorrow.
We'll add it to the list.
Every day's a school day, isn't it?
It is indeed. It certainly is. And we've got some great final tasting notes coming in there. Connor saying grappa notes. He's agreeing with one of the previous comments. And Anna saying yes to grappa, but not particularly enjoying this one. Good to learn which flavour profiles I prefer. And we've got Tim Foster saying yes, EU states 3 years old, so that's for you, Olaf, and that's our colleague Tim. Nice to have you with us, Tim.
Oh, hiya, Tim.
But I think that's probably we've talked about this one for quite a while, so I think it'd be a good point to move on to dram number 3, which is 5.81, a fruity prescription. I believe that one's yours, Olaf.
It is indeed. So I'll just pour it for me.
And Maya Vogue Bab says, notice how these whiskies change in the glass and get more interesting. Both have gotten sweeter over time.
Yep. Yep. I don't know if you've added water as well, because that's, again, if you add water, the changes are actually going to be even more noticeable, because then you're opening up the whiskey and then you're releasing flavors and aromas, and then the oxidization starting as well. While if you don't add water, it's actually fairly stable in the glass, so it won't be changing that much. But with a drop of water, that's another reason why we don't add water from the beginning, because we want you to do it as you would like. Now here we have the distillery number 5. So that was one of the really early days of distilleries we bottled. I think probably that was even the one in the first outturn, as we call it, which comes out, well, nowadays every first Friday. And it probably was the 1.1, the 2.1, 3.14, and 5.1. So here we have a fruity prescription, as we call it, as the heading. 16th of January 2003, 18 years old, and it's a first fill bourbon barrel. So that's different to the other two we've had, which were refill. This one basically only had once before American whiskey in it, bourbon or Tennessee, because they by law cannot use the cask for a second time. So it's got either shipped to Scotland, and we're going to enjoy it here, or it gets shipped to the Caribbean, and almost as a good drink, Scotch and rum gets matured in those casks. So here was for bourbon hogshead, spicy and sweet. I think it was a barrel. Was it a barrel? Was it a hogshead?
I've got
barrel.
Barrel.
It was a barrel. Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Barrels just, again, slightly smaller, so therefore more wood contact than you would have in a hogshead. Now, every whiskey which you're drinking here now this evening has gone through the panel, because we have to ensure that the quality is good enough to be bottled. Being a single cask, it is very different to a blended whiskey or indeed a single malt, because a blended whiskey, as the name says, is a blend. So it's a blend between different malts and grain whiskey. So these are your Johnny Walker, Bell's, Teachers, Famous Grouse, Chivas Regal. By the way, of those 1.6 billion bottles sold last year, 90% are blends. 90%. 9.99% are probably single malts, and 0.1% is what we're drinking here, single cask whiskies. So when I became a member in 1992, and then I moved to London, stayed there far too long, 7 years, and then I moved to Edinburgh in 2001. And when I moved to Edinburgh, they said, Olaf, now you're here, why don't you join the panel? And I knew nothing about the panel. I said, what is the panel? Well, they try the whiskey and decide if it's good enough. And it took me 1 nanosecond if I decided to be at the panel. So here I am 21 years later, and I'm also one of the chairperson now of the panel, which basically makes sure that the panel runs in an orderly fashion, which having 10 single cask strength whiskies can sometimes be a challenge. I promise you, I do spit out, which most of my colleagues do as well, because usually after the third or fourth whiskey, every whiskey would pass quite happily if you would swallow it. And so therefore, we're looking at the whiskey. So we're doing exactly the same thing as you just do now. We'll look at the color, we nose it, we taste it, and then we'll add some water and nose it and taste it again. And then when we decide to pass the whiskey, it's up to the chairperson to write a tasting note with the information of the panel members, of all of them, and also writing the heading. So in this case, it's a fruity prescription. The tasting note really is for the people who cannot try the whiskey before they buy it, because most people, unfortunately, cannot go to our members' rooms or cannot go to members' tastings as regular as we try to do them, and therefore they rely on the tasting note. So the tasting note is an accurate description of the whiskey, which we, at the time when we tried it. So if it's 4 people, tomorrow would be different 4 people, it would be a different tasting note. So it's not correct. It's not, I've seen so many people will look at it and sort of say, oh, gee, they've got 5 notes here and I've got none. I'm a complete loser. Or one other person says, I get 4 out of 5 in the nose neat, so I'm a super noser. It's not about that. It's not about right and wrong. We just try to describe it as honestly as we can. And yes, we then have a bit of a fun heading as well, because obviously you want to get your interest going. And we also want some fun, by the way, because whiskey is about fun. It's not about taking it too serious. There's much more serious things in the world going on than whiskey. So we'll just sit down, have a little snifter. And I can tell you one thing, a good story never started with a salad. It started with a glass of whiskey. So that's what we're doing. So we're nosing this one. And you see that's a spicy and sweet one we gave it. That's one of those. Again, very, very creamy, very vanilla notes coming through, which is the first fill bourbon barrel.
Really interesting point as well from Anne there, where she's saying she sometimes gets none of the tasting notes. And I would say that is totally okay, because however many people sat on that panel, there were 4 of them or 5 of them or 3 of them, they all got different tasting notes, and it may not be the same as what you get. So don't think just because you read this tasting note and you haven't got any of those things that you're wrong.
Yeah, no, and I'm absolutely with you. What I don't like is, when someone says, "Oh, I get vanilla custard," and then someone says, "You're wrong," because the only thing you really can say is, "I do not get vanilla custard." I mean, that's the one thing you can say. But also, if someone says, what you're writing here is complete nonsense. Again, I've got no problem with that, because what I'm then saying, Anne, is, well, what do you get? Because that's what it's about. It's about exchanging views. It's about exchanging opinions. So, yeah.
We've got an interesting tasting note here. My Evoke Bab, brilliantly named. There's something medical in the background I can't place. And then they followed up with bandages, ?
Yeah. Well, sorry, brilliantly named. I'm afraid I can't claim that one. So therefore, one of my fellow chairpersons have named that one. But I agree, there is something.
I see what you mean. I'm not sure bandages. When sometimes you get a what we'd refer to as an Islay whiskey, a traditional Islay whiskey, and they kind of talk about medicinal germaline and that kind of thing. Not
KCP.
Quite as strong as that. Not quite as strong as that. Maybe more of a sort of minty thing.
Yeah, I think like essential oil, like arnica or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Spearmint, maybe. But hey,
Spearmint,
you get bandages. You get bandages.
Tim, I feel like your tasting notes put my vocabulary to shame.
Glad to hear this.
I was hoping that was going to be Tim Foster. I was going to say, well, that's why I am why I am, and you are where you are.
Tim, but I can tell you one thing. It's all about practice. I always say that to people, because people say, how can you come up with this? I've been doing it now for 20 years. And the first time 20 years ago, I remember sitting in the panel, all these people surrounding me with written books and everything, which I read probably 5-10 years before I became a panel member. And I'm sort of nosing the whiskey. And I say, oh, that's really smells good. And drink it. And, oh, this is perfect and everything. And then they talk about, the meadows on a sunny day, or where the rain just came 5 minutes ago. And to be honest, I thought this is all nonsense. They're making this up. But if you practice, and it doesn't have to be alcohol, it doesn't have to be whiskey, it can be anything. Nosing, just take it in, think about it. What did I just smell? And then put it into your brain as well properly, because we don't use it. We use sell-by dates. Why do you need a sell-by date? If there's a yogurt, you just open it, you nose it, you taste it. If it smells good, if it tastes good, I don't care about the sell-by date.
Yeah.
Well, I would say as well, one of the things that when we were doing more of these virtual tastings, we had quite often snack pairings for each dram. And one of the ways that we came up with those pairings is we would sit down at a table. Obviously, this was during lockdown, so we did it with our respective households. We'd sit down, with a pile of snacks in the middle of the table, and then you try different things with different whiskies. And it might be that if you have slices of apple, that it really makes one whiskey sing and makes one whiskey taste absolutely terrible. It's all about that trial and error and that memory and that scent. Even just standing with your spice rack and opening the different spices and smelling them and nosing them, your brain starts to remember those flavors, and it gives you a vocabulary that you can then use in your whiskey journey.
And it's not just
No.
about assessing the flavor as well. It's an experiential thing. One of my favorite things that's ever happened to me in my whiskey career, if that's what it is a guy came up to me in an SMWS stand in, I think it was Glasgow last year or the year before, and he described to me the kind of whiskey he liked to taste. So I did my very best. Okay, you like this, that, the other. Try this one. If you don't like it, come back in 5 minutes, sort of thing. So off he went, and he came back and he said, "I'm sorry, Connors, you got that wrong." I said, "Oh well." He says, "Yeah, I'm going to need to buy 6 of those right now." And I was like, "What?"
Yeah.
He says, "I don't know what it is about that whiskey, but when I tried it, when I smelled it, when I tasted it, when I experienced it, I was a 9-year-old kid standing in my granny's pantry again." And I was like, it just took me there. There's no other way of describing it. Give me my 5 bottles, please. So it's not just a case of, remembering the smells. What do they remind you of? I mean,
Connors, you're absolutely spot on, and that actually I'm looking at the chats here as well, and because I'm agreeing. I mean, it says spicy and sweet, but for me it's very sweet, very smooth. Like Anna says, jelly beans as well. I'm with you. For me, this is much more sweet, fruity, and mellow for me actually than the one before. But that's what it's all about. It's differences, and exactly what Connor says. And Anne's asking, do you think some of these notes come from the memories they invoke? Because that's exactly what it is. And that's the training you do as well. Because the more you train your brain and thinking about aromas, the more aromas coming back to you. And most aromas are coming back to you from childhood, because that's when you soak them all in, because that's when your brain is the most active and you're taking it all in. And that's the beauty about it, because then all of a sudden you remember it. But then it becomes that personal, just like Connor says, because when I'm saying, this reminds me visiting my grandfather. Now, if my grandfather was a lovely grandfather and gave me lots of money to buy jelly beans, then obviously it's a very positive moment of memory. But if my grandfather would have been sort of an old Victorian, sort of saying children should be seen but not heard, and you got a slap every time, then it's a negative memory. So as soon as I'm saying this reminds me of visiting my grandfather, it depends who my grandfather was, if I'm going to like this whiskey or not. It's that personal, and you can't describe that. You can't put logic on it. It's just
I think that's the art of the tasting panel. I mean, that is why you see these moments, and all of us have experienced that before. When you're working at a festival or you're at a tasting, and someone tries one of the society whiskies, and there's this light bulb moment, and someone says, "That reminds me of X," and maybe it's the name that's gotten them there, but then in nosing it or trying it, it's taken them the rest of the way. That's kind of the magic of it in my mind, is when those notes are brought to life and someone says, absolutely, that's it, or they have a completely different memory that the whiskey evokes and they share that with you, because that's really special.
That's it. And Madeline, not to forget as well, we've got some international members in the panel as well. I'm a German myself. So my memories of childhood memories will be very different to someone else's who grown up in Scotland. So again, that's where the difference comes in. That's why a lot of things get lost in translation as well in that respect, because you wouldn't have the same. I mean, like my classic one is when someone says to me, "Oh, that tastes like," I mean, we've got jelly beans here, so I can tell you one thing. If it would have been an elder, sort of my generation from the UK, probably Spangles would have come up. Spangles is a sweet which you can't buy anymore because it apparently has been so popular that it's no longer available. So I can't. So when someone says Spangles, I can't say no or yes because I've never had it and I never have a chance to get it. So that's what it is. I mean, sort of, it's fascinating in that respect. So,
and that sort of brings us around quite nicely to the idea of assessing a whiskey and enjoying a whiskey.
Yes.
You can train yourself to say, I can taste honey, I can taste lemon, I can taste custard, I can taste blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't really tell you anything about the experience of drinking it. It's a different thing. That's
why, Connors, I've got one thing which I always recommend for people is knows it first time and just write down 3 things which come to your mind. Don't think, because when you start thinking, so just write down lemon, butter, and oranges, so whatever you want to write. So then you nose it again and you write another 3 words, but it's different 3 words to the 3 words you've just written already.
Yeah.
And then comes the fun part, because then you nose it a 3rd time and then you say, now you can't use those 6 words. anymore, because then descriptors come. Then it's no longer words, because then all of a sudden it's, oh yes, when I helped, doing the harvest or something, or picking the grapes and stuff, then all of a sudden you get into stories, and that's really where you want to go, because we can discuss it if it's lime or lemon. I mean, yeah, it doesn't really matter if it's lime or lemon, sort of, but yeah, but that's when the fun starts.
No, definitely. And I mean, while we're talking about great names, the next dram, 68.87, gooey, nutty, and buttery, which is also a little bit hard to say, like that last one. I have been dying to kind of try this one all night, the colour of it and the name. So, Connors, do you want to tell us a bit about this one?
Absolutely. Distillery 68. It's bottle number 87 that we've done from 68. And as you can see, it's called Gooey, Nutty, and Buttery. It's from Deep, Rich, and Dry Fruits Flavour Profile. And Madeline actually touched on the colour of the whiskey there. Now, all whiskey gets its colour from the cask. When it comes off a still, it's absolutely clear. So assessing the colour, generally speaking, it officially tells you nothing whatsoever about the maturation. The reason for that is casks get reused and so on and so forth. Lots of different things mitigate from that to give you a definite answer. But a kind of rule of thumb, the darker the whiskey, the more likely it's been in a European oak cask that used to hold sherry. The lighter, it's more likely to have been in a bourbon cask that has held bourbon, funnily enough, usually from America. This one has been finished in a PX hogshead. PX is Pedro Jimenez. I know Olaf's a huge fan of sherry and its associated drinks from around Jerez. But PX is a very, very sweet sherry. It's the one that is commonly used as an example for putting on your ice cream. And it's really thick and viscous. And as we can see, it's produced, in this case, a darker spirit. Now, if we stick our nose in there, initially I found that a little bit kind of closed. I had to go in a little bit deeper.
Let's try.
Yeah, it's my mind is going back to dry fruits. Kind of dry
It's
fruits
very
and blueberries.
Christmassy.
Yeah. Dry fruits, cinnamon.
It's a lot more. It's a lot more. I mean, I know what you're saying. It's sort of more sort of closed, but because it's more wood dominated, while the first three are probably a little bit more. Well, the second one as well, of course, being from India, but more spirit driven than.
Yeah.
But it's.
But I want to say the word purple for some reason. I'm not sure if it's just because like little surround there. I'm thinking, kind of blueberries and plums and.
I do get a wee bit of that, but also those oranges where you stick lots of cloves in them and then they dry out and you have them Christmas after Christmas. So not the smell of a freshly made one, but the smell of one that you've maybe had for a few Christmases, and you take it out and you open up the bag and then you've got that waft of orange clove.
Yeah. No, I mean, what you see as well, if you're sort of a geek like we all are, the three of us, I mean, sort of you can see how it's clinging onto the glass as well, and the legs coming down, the tears very, very slow and very thick. So, I mean, again, some sort of indication that the mouthfeel might be quite big. I mean, sort of the viscosity, as we call it, as an indication. I mean, sort of, it almost doesn't want to come down. Those tears on the glass. Beautiful color as well.
Yeah, to be fair, Olaf, the viscosity in the mouthfeel are something that people generally don't talk about a great deal in spirits, generally, really, not just whiskey. But I always say kind of treat it a little bit like mouthwash, and see how it clings to the inside of your palate. Even do a little, lipstick thing.
Because that's it. It's the mouth. The mouthfeel. The mouthfeel is something which I think gets underestimated. I mean, sort of.
But there's a little bit of pepper in there as well. I'm going to go in and try it on the palate.
Yeah. Wow.
That's really mouth coating.
Doesn't disappoint.
No.
I feel like I've got taste buds in my cheeks. You know, it's literally the whole of my mouth. It's kind of full of flavour. A lot more spice on the palate.
Yeah, but Anne's got a good point. This sounds delicious. Will you try it with water? I actually probably would have that neat at the moment. I mean, I will add some water to it because that's what we're doing in the panel as well.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has to add water, but you can put just a drop in, or you can put something more in. But to me, and again, this is 57.6, so we're all in the same ballpark with those 4 whiskies here. But this one I find just so beautiful as it is. I mean, sort of, they're quite a powerful aftertaste. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just about to say the finish is still going. Yeah, I put my dram down before you started talking there, and it's still kind of delivering on that flavour. And you know, we were talking briefly about casks then. I mean, when you think about what we actually do to make the whiskey, where we have the most sort of input is around the maturation of the whiskey. So it's not just a case of trying to replicate what the original distillery might do. If, say, there's a Speyside distillery who traditionally use sherry oak, well, we might try it in bourbon, or, you know, we might put it in a red wine cask or something like that. So we do play with things a lot, and there's a huge array of different things that we can look at. We mentioned earlier the size of the cask. The smaller the cask, basically, the more surface area to liquid inside. Therefore, you get more activity inside the cask. Not just traditional bourbon or sherry. We've matured in rum, port, red wine barrique casks, and all kinds of fun and games. Yeah. And we've even sort of, you know, we had a couple of editions of Distillery 4 recently where most of the maturation, around about 16, 17 years, was in Oloroso sherry. And then it had another 2 or 3 years in PX sherry, which I don't think I've seen that anywhere else. Right? No. I'm not saying it hasn't happened anywhere else, but
no.
I'd be happy to find out. So we really take, you know, pride in that side of things and delivering what we think is a flavour forward process. We start with the idea of flavour and then work back from that. And if you want to talk about distillery processes and all that kind of thing, then great, we can talk about that. And because we're so kind of flavour forward, Connor's this. Thanks, Tim. Cheers, mate. He doesn't like the Duchess de Bourgogne beer from Belgium. I love it though. So, you know, because we're flavour forward, we start with flavour. So we've kind of branched out into other things as well. We bottle our own rum, we bottle our own gin, we bottle our own Armagnac and cognac, and so on and so forth. And we always start from the point of view of flavour. And if we think it's good enough to go into one of our iconic green bottles, then that's where it's going. And we're gonna celebrate that. And generally speaking, you know, and it's not just a case of Scotch all the time. Tonight we've had whiskey from India, we've had Taiwanese whiskey, we've had Japanese whiskey, we've had whiskey from all over the Nordics. We've had American rye whiskey, American bourbon whiskey, American corn whiskey. And, you know, in today's whiskey world, everyone who was previously drinking single malt Scotch is now making their own single malt whiskey. So there's going to be a huge influx of different things coming our way from all over the globe. So it's a hugely exciting time to get involved in whiskey. And for me, trying the raw spirit at its very best, I don't think you can go further than us.
Yep. No, I agree. I mean, that's the quality of the new spirit, of the clear spirit, is now so good. So you can really experiment with the casks, you know, sort of you can really start. And obviously we're not bound to the distillery profile either, because that's why we have the numbers. You know, I mean, the distillery has a certain profile and people would expect that profile. Well, no, I mean, you might have now, what is it? You might have now 68.87 and 68.88 might be completely different.
Absolutely.
That's
different flavor profiles, and
different tasks, different everything. I mean, this is the beauty about it. I'm sort of, the question there was, how many times does a cask get reused? Well, I mean, a lifespan of a cask is probably about 50 years, I mean, I would say. And the question, again, this is the more you know about maturation, the little you know about it. I mean, because this is the beauty. As soon as you stick it into a cask, that's when the magic happens.
That's right.
And for example, now you can have a second fill cask, but actually the first fill was 30 years in it.
Yeah.
So that cask is very used. I mean, because it was 30 years. Now you can have a fourth fill cask, and each time it was just used for finishing. And I'm not talking extra maturation like we do it, which is usually 2 or 3 years, but a finish could be as short as 3 or 6 months. So all of a sudden, you're going to have a third fill cask, but actually it only had 1.5 years whiskey in it. So therefore, it's a very active cask.
And conversely, I mean, there is no minimum initial aging as well. So technically, you could put it into a cask for a day and then finish it for 50 years. So it's kind of 6 of one and half a dozen of the other.
No, this is all the information we're giving. I realize the more information, and we'll give you all the information we have, because we don't have a problem saying that's a 5th or 6th fill cask. We don't have a problem with that. The industry has, because it just sounds like a tea bag you used 5 times to make tea, which obviously you don't have tea anymore.
Yeah.
But with whiskey, you might actually have very good whiskey, even out of a 5th fill cask.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's things like, the traditional conversations over the regions of Scotland. If it comes from the Lowlands, it has to taste like this. If it comes from the Highlands or Islay or Campbelltown and all that kind of thing. Historically, that may well have been true. You may well have a chance of spotting a Lowland whiskey because, in 1833, the infrastructure wasn't available to make a whiskey that what we would perceive as an Islay whiskey. But now the infrastructure and what we know about making whiskey is so much kind of better, and it's evolved, completely. I've been reading up on this; it's ridiculous. And if someone in Speyside wants to make an Islay style whiskey, there's nothing stopping them from doing that.
Nope.
And vice versa, and it works in all kinds of areas. It's not really a good indicator anymore. The only indicator there is really is tasting it yourself.
Yeah, and then you just try it, and if you like it, it's a good whiskey for you. And if you don't like it, it's a bad whiskey for you. But it doesn't mean it's not a good whiskey for your neighbor or for someone else.
Absolutely. And Conus, I'm just going to jump in because we've got some questions flying in thick and fast.
Okay.
So first question is from Connor. Conus, for the number 4 you just mentioned with the 2 finishes, if both casks were both European oak, then the difference in sherry type would be minor in the overall scheme of things, right?
Well, that's a very interesting conversation. Now, there are certain things that we know a lot about, and it's quite easy to measure. Basically, all of those things happen in the distillery when they're making what we call new make spirit. Now, once it goes into a cask, as Olaf was saying, there are so many variables. We can estimate where we would like it to go, but we never really guaranteed. From the point of view of some a club that bottles single cask bottlings, that can cause a problem. As Olaf was saying, if you're a blender, you can kind of play with it a little bit and mask what you don't want and accentuate what you do want. In the case of the previous fills, the bottom line at the moment is there is only circumstantial evidence to suggest that it might make a difference to what we can taste. Now, if you can tell the difference, great. Happy days. There's no real science to back it up. With regards to the different types of oak, American versus European, European oak tends to, I've seen the word tannous very briefly earlier. European oak tends to have more tannic qualities because it has less of something called an oak lactone that has all kinds of compounds in it called vanillin and so on and so forth, which you would associate the flavors of kind of vanilla cedar wood, gorse flower, and that kind of thing, which you get from the American bourbon casks. At the end of the day, you get what you get. And there's that argument again about age. Older is better. Well, no, better is better. Some whiskeys work young, some whiskeys work old. I mean, the youngest tonight was what, 5 years old?
Yeah.
I would say, that's probably at least my second favorite so far, in my opinion. So again, it's timing, and that's where the art of whiskey making from everywhere comes in. You can't go far enough with science to say, well, these different compounds work in the glass, because, well, it just doesn't work like that. It's not that advanced. The only people who can figure it out are the people bottling it, and that's always got to be a human.
But the one thing as well, Con, is to say to this all, the industry has no interest of diversification. If the industry would know, I've got the new spirit, I'll put it into the cask, in 10 years' time, I'm going to get X, Y, and Z. That's what they want, but they can't get it. So that's why they need the variety of casks. They're not because they want the variety of casks, but they need the variety of casks to blend it together to make the same. Because
and then you've got the quality of the raw materials. I mean, barley doesn't grow exactly the same way every year.
That's it.
And so on and so forth.
But at the end of the day, those 22 million casks, I mean, 98% are going to be blended.
Yeah.
They're either going to be blended in the blend, or they're going to be blended in a single malt, because a single malt is still a blend, but from one distillery. So that's what you have to keep in mind in terms of looking at it. So what we're looking at here, this is just, I mean, that's just such a minority, but that's what we're looking at, and that's what we want to learn. We want to find out what is different. And I've seen Andreas. I don't know, and I probably know you by looking at you from Denmark. Have you been at the festival as well, Andreas? Because if you have, I might have had a little sample bottle from you as well. It's a good festival in Denmark.
It looked cracking. We've got a few more questions here, and I'm very aware we've still got the final dram of the evening as well. So, Conus, second question for you. I can see some black and orange labeled bottles behind Conus. What is the difference? Are they the different spirits you were talking about?
Oh, they're the different spirits I'm talking about.
So.
Well, these are basically bottles that have we've decided they're so special that they should get their own livery and probably pay a little bit more for them as well. That's basically the top and bottom of it. We have, a huge stock of casks now. Olaf, feel free to correct me, but I think the last time I spoke to anyone, it was 33,000 casks sitting around in our warehouse now. And it's, we do have some real gems in there. We get casks from all over the world. And because we've been around for so long, some of that stock is getting older. And because it's getting older, not only is evaporation happening, but the equivalent stock from the actual original distilleries is also getting rarer. So we kind of put it in some special livery there to kind of highlight the kind of rarity of it. And at the end of the day, really, you get as many bottles as you get from a cask. You may have a leaky cask. It doesn't mean that the whiskey that's left in there is bad.
Just the opposite.
And single cask means the whiskey comes from one cask. Yeah.
We've had a big argument with the SWA on that one. So if you move one cask, a whole single cask into another single cask, but the SWA said it's no longer a single cask. So therefore, even if you just move the entirety of one cask into a new cask, it's no longer a single cask. So it's then a single malt. So
really,
that's
the first I've heard of that.
Yep. So basically,
that'll probably have a bit of a knock on for people who like to, do extra periods of maturation and so on and so forth.
No, we've had huge up, because usually what happens, if you're thinking of think of Balvenie double wood or something, which was 10 years in bourbon and then 2 years in sherry. But what happens is, after 10 years in bourbon, they take all those bourbon casks, blend them together, and then put them all into sherry casks. So therefore, that's no longer. But we argued, and we argued at SWA, if you use the entirety of just one cask and move that, don't blend it, don't mix it with anything else into a different cask. But the SWA is the Scotch Whisky Association, which basically is the body for the industry, said you can't then clarify it anymore as a single cask.
They've got a hard job, haven't they?
But again, at the end of the day, Lewis, it doesn't matter because the flavor is important. And if you like it, then is it a single cask? Is it not? Is it what? I mean, sort of like Connors was saying, we're doing things as well, which are blended whiskies and stuff as well. So, I mean, in a way, we're doing lots and lots of things. But I can tell you one thing. I've been a member for 30 years. Yes, we're doing lots of other things, but the clue is in the name, Single Malt Scotch Whisky Society. I mean, so we are Scotch Malt Whisky Society. We do single malt, single cask whiskies. And the variety never has been more than today in that area. Of course,
let's be fair, the outturns now are getting ridiculous. 30 bottles a month.
Yes.
So how am I supposed to keep up with that? Yeah. My face is red enough, thank you very much. And just to circle back, I've been corrected here. We've got 15,000 casks, not 32. Right. Or 33, whatever I said. We've got 37,000 members in 15. Yeah.
Was that Tim again or something correct?
I believe it was producer Andrew. It was.
Oh right, okay.
But on that note of outturns and new whiskey, I think it's a great time to dive onto the last one, which is 53.409. The Naked Truth, puzzlingly delightful. It's puzzling delightful.
Puzzling delightful. The Naked Truth. Bloody hell. So here we go.
It's a long name. Whoever came up with that one.
Wasn't me, Madeline. I'm afraid it wasn't me. But I can see why the Naked Truth, because you can see 11 years old. Again, a refill ex-bourbon hogshead, and looking at the color, it's probably a refill. I mean, sort of, because the beauty is, usually we get the information of first fill, which means I love the Scots because it's not first fill. It's the first time Scotch whiskey's gone in because something else was in beforehand, but we'll forget that fact in Scotland. So it's a first fill, first time Scotch whiskey. We sometimes get second fill, but then it becomes definitely a refill. Now you will get more and more information from us. Like we even have now. I mean, with whiskey it always takes time because it takes years. But what we're doing now, even, and you've seen, well, you might not have seen if you're a new member, but we're getting to that point where we can actually say we re-racked that into a cask where this whiskey was in it before. So we're getting more and more precise because we've got that information, and whatever information we have, we're happily sharing with you. There's nothing we want to hide because there's no point, because it doesn't matter. So this one, certainly, I mean, it's been that's why it's called probably the Naked Truth as well. As I say, I didn't write it, but because we're probably very close here to the actual spirit, to the actual new spirit, because the cask has done very, very little looking at the color.
I've got to say, 53 as a distillery is so consistent. I keep telling myself I'm not supposed to have favorite distilleries. I shouldn't go to certain numbers or anything like that. But it's harder to find a bad one of these.
I think there's some common flavor notes. Certainly, not that I don't get it in every single bottling from this distillery, but certainly in this one, there's this kind of briny ash that I always get, like drinking, something like olives that have had a bit of chili in them or something like that, with some ash swirling around in the brine.
Yeah, no, I mean you can see as well, it's the 409th cask. I mean, so what we like what we get from these guys. And Andrew, you saying to the panel, is there a distillery out there that's on your wish list to have a society bottle? There is a list which is as long as my arm, Andrew. I mean, there's plenty out there. I mean, this is the beauty. When people ask me, Olaf, which is your favorite whiskey? I always say it's the next one coming. I mean, that's my favorite whiskey. And that's what it is about the society. Because if I would have got a pound every time someone said to me, Olaf, last time you were here, you know, in Aberdeen or in Dundee or in Inverness, you had this wonderful bottle, this number 3. You remember it? I said, yep. I should have bought a bottle then. Can I buy a bottle? The answer is no, because it's gone. I mean, here you've got 301 bottles. And I'm not going to say now we've got 37,000 members, because someone's going to say we haven't. We've only got 36,000. We've got 38,000. But we've got a reasonable amount of numbers. So 301 bottles, they're not going to last for long. And that's what Madeline said at the beginning. Unfortunately, all of these bottles, except for I think it's the 134, is sold out. That's the problem. But on the other hand, also the excitement about the society, you know. And don't get hung up about it. If you're missing that one, there will be another one around the corner. And that's what it's all about. Wood ash, campfire, barbecue, TCP. I'm not much on the TCP for me. I mean, sort of.
I think it's a similar thing to when somebody said before the kind of medicinal side of it. I would go more lemony on this.
Yep. I'm sort of
personally.
Lemon on oysters as well. Sort of, that's to me sort of is that sort of thing. It's got that seaweedy.
Yeah. And again,
so
this is another thing about what they're called. We got flavor profiles. You know, for me, although it is clearly peated, there is a shout for putting this in oily and coastal.
Yep. I'm absolutely with you. That's the problem you have. But if it is peated, of course, you have to call it peated, because otherwise, you know, the problem. Because I said the flavor profiles are not perfect, but there are distilleries which do peated and non-peated whiskies. Yes. So in a way, there it is very useful to have that flavor profile, because therefore you can exactly know what you're looking for. You know, if you don't like peaty whiskies, like when people say, "Oh, I only drink Islay whiskies," you know, well, what they're actually saying, I only drink peated whiskies, because that's what it's supposed to be. But there's plenty of wonderful whiskies on Islay which are not peated.
Yeah. And
there's plenty of whiskies which are peated which are not Islay. So that's why where you said with the regions and everything, forget that. I mean, that's irrelevant, really. I mean, like a lot of things are irrelevant. I mean, sort of in that respect. Just try it. Just try it. And I
think it's fair in my experience anyway. You know, I'm relatively new to whiskey compared to you, Olaf, maybe about sort of 15 years. I've been sort of interested in whiskey. Every single kind of bias that I had somehow absorbed through the media or wherever has been proved to be completely wrong.
Yeah,
it's like, you know, older whiskies are better than young whiskies, not necessarily. Single malts are better than blends, not necessarily, and so on and so forth.
Darker whiskey is better than lighter whiskey, and all that.
It's just rubbish. It's just you've got to experience it. You've got to go.
But Connors, even I find myself still in the panel. You know, you're looking at a whiskey and you're thinking that distillery, nothing good coming from that distillery. I've never really, and so then you nose and you think this is superb.
Yeah.
Because it's just, you know, you just get away from it. Don't think. That's why I say to people, don't look at color, don't look at age, don't look at the distillery name, don't look at anything. Just try it.
Yeah. As I mentioned right at the start, you know, there is a good shout for everybody trying everything blind first. And it takes away all of that bias, and you're just, you know, looking at the liquid. Questions from Lewis.
And that's in a way
good one from Lewis. Actually, we should jump on that one.
Cool.
So, given you buy the cask from the distilleries already filled and you don't move it, then is the skill you add in knowing how to pick the cask in the first place, then deciding when to bottle it?
Well, that's not necessarily true there, Lewis. We basically have 3 ways in which we can acquire casks. Because we have such a good kind of relationship with various distilleries going back 40 years. And as Olaf mentioned, we started, you know, at a ridiculous time in the whiskey industry. Nobody was doing it when we started. We kind of got in there and built up really good relationships. So we have what are called filling contracts with some distilleries, whereby we send the wood that we choose specifically. We have a massive sherry program coming up. We've been working with different bodegas in Spain who specifically filled the sherry casks for us to our specifications. That'll be coming soon. And they use our wood that we source to put the spirit into.
Yeah.
The second way is what you're talking about, whereby maybe a cask goes on sale, or a parcel of cask go on sale from the distillery or from a broker, and we buy it in. And finally, private sales. We've had more than one or two different members who've had a cask say, well, I'd just like to see our whiskey in SMWS livery. Would you mind buying this off us? And we'll take a few bottles and you can sell the rest. And we've done that too. But, the skill is still in getting it right at the end. Regardless, because there is so little you can do to control maturation, apart from, have a appropriately ventilated warehouse at a steady temperature. Even then, there's no two planks of wood the same. There's no two casks the same. Casks right next to each other in warehouses have been known to be completely different at the end of the maturation time. The skill is knowing when to try it and when to, pull the trigger, as it were, and pop it into a bottle.
Yeah, I mean, it's lovely. It's wonderful to see that all the comments coming in for that one, because it's sort of cliche, but you love it or hate it. I mean, sort of in a way. And,
you know what? I'm getting on my high horse again. But I used to hate peated whiskey. I couldn't stand it. But what happened was I was in a restaurant and there was a cheese board that came out, and I was just chewing some apple and Stilton. And I got a whiff of somebody else's Islay whiskey. I can't remember which one it was. And I thought, give me a little try of that. And just that little bit of smoke behind the Stilton and the apple, the sharpness and the sweetness and the sourness, and that little bit of smoke behind it, it was like, wow, that's what it's for. It has flavor. It's not just an angry Scotsman trying to pull my teeth out. It's
no, Connors, I've done last week, on Thursday, I've had a charcuterie tasting with whiskey, and again, very, very different whiskeys with very, very different types of charcuterie, be the chorizo being a French style, sort of Italian style salami as well. And the next day, actually, I was doing a tasting at the Tempest Brewery in Melrose, again with beer and whiskey, and again with a beer which was in Islay cask whiskies. I mean, sort of, and again, it's just so different, and all of a sudden you're drinking a whiskey, you're drinking the beer, you're drinking the whiskey again. It's very different. I mean, sort of, and it's all these experiments, and that's what mentioned before. That's what we're trying to do as well. Like I always say, give me a cheese board, some oat crackers, oat cakes, and a whiskey, a meal for a king. I mean, it's just, I'm happy. And that's what peaty whiskies come to their own. But this one, I must say, and I've got here something sort of lurking and sort of not really liking it, weird smell, because this one is quite, it is 53, but it's also not 53 in a way, because of the way, the lack of maturation in a way from the cask. And I do like it. But I can see why people sort of say this is a bit. Well, I'll tell you one thing. I had to learn it the hard way because obviously not being British. I mean, sort of when I became a chairperson about 12 or 13 years ago, you've got a British person, because most panel members by definition would be British, and then you sort of hear someone saying, this is interesting. This is very interesting. And I'm sort of thinking, yeah, just give me more. What is interesting? But actually, I had to find out when a British person says it's very interesting, he says, I don't like it. That's the way to say it, polite. But when a European says, this is very interesting, he actually means it being very interesting. So I'm always, when now people say to me, this is interesting, I always say, is this a British interesting or a European interesting? I mean, sort of in terms of it. And I think I've got one person here. It's quite, Ethan, for example, I think for you, it's a British interesting. For Matt, it's probably more European interesting. But also there was one who didn't like it at all. I think it's already gone now in terms of something rotten. I just see that there. So it's what it is. I mean, sort of, there's nothing, a whiff of smoke, but mainly something rotten. So again, it's more of a British interesting. But also the other word which we don't want in the society is nice. Because we don't want nice. Because nice is not nice. Nice is just sort of lukewarm. We want something which is hot and cold. We want something which, I mean, like I've been in Aberdeen many years, and one time one member who knows me for 10 years, he says, Olaf, this whiskey, I mean, this is just so bad. I mean, I'm actually thinking of not renewing my membership, because if you put it like this, and I'm quoting him, shite like this, I don't want to be part of it. So I swallowed, because I'm usually quite quick with answers, but I couldn't be quick there. But thank God I was quick, because someone on a round table on the other side of the table said, what did you just say to Olaf? The third whiskey. That's the best one. I'll buy 3 bottles. That's exactly what we're about. You know, it's I'm always saying, if people say this is not good quality whiskey, then I've got a problem. But if people say I don't like this whiskey, I don't have a problem, because we only have to find 301 people who actually like it.
Yeah. And again, Olaf, I mean, because of our kind of what we are, there's not really an equivalent of us, certainly in whiskey anyway, whereby, you know, we physically go out to people and, you know, there is no chance of getting the same bottle twice on one of our tastings. We're allowed to, you know, give our own opinions on it and be honest about it. If I was at a tasting and there was 6 whiskeys and I said, these are the 6 best whiskeys in the world, the first thing that people there would think is, this guy is talking rubbish, because they just can't be. So we would lose credibility as well if we were to say, you know, these are all going to be great, you're going to love them, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, you know, it's about facilitating your journey as opposed to dictating it. And, you know, you've got to go there to find out.
Yeah,
definitely. Well, I'm going to jump in now, because I can just see all the questions coming in, and we're running out of time. So I just want to make sure that we've got those answered. Goron 204, thoughts on the Boutique Whiskey Company? Do they operate in a similar way to the SMWS? We can't really possibly say, but they do some great stuff. And in terms of other questions, we've also had another one from Prince Rupert's Dog. In light of today's mass production of spirits, do you find it more difficult to get good quality casks?
No, just the opposite, actually, because the spirit is now of that good quality. I mean, sort of what we're missing, that the quality as such is gone up tremendously over the last 30 years because of the knowledge we're having, and the knowledge we're having in spirit production of distillation. The Scotch Whisky Research Institute is enormous. The jump from 1970 to now is huge. The issue we're having with that is we don't have those outliers anymore. We don't have those extremes in terms of, I mean, there is a saying in Scotland, we don't have bad whiskey, we just have good and very good whiskey. I can tell you, I've been in the panel for 20 years. I've tried some bloody awful whiskey in the panel. And I always thought we should bottle one of those, but marketing would never do it, just to tell you what we're doing in the panel, because there are. So therefore, the thing is, you've got that quality, that high quality now, and then now you've got the cask management coming in as well. In the olden days, there were some casks lying there, so let's just fill them. Nowadays, it's much more controlled. So actually, the quality of whiskey we find today, even being mass production, is higher than it ever was before in the past.
And of course, conversely, Olaf, we've got a situation now where, for want of a better word, there's a craft movement, a little bit like the craft beer movement, whereby new people are coming along and they are doing things that aren't necessarily the norm. You know, we were talking about the standard of whiskey has gone up. I would thoroughly agree with that, certainly since the 60s and 70s. The difference being before that, it was up and down, up and down, up and down. So there was some rubbish, but there was some really great stuff as well. So I suppose people are trying to isolate what the really great stuff was and try and reproduce that. You know, whether they can or can't is different, a matter of conversation at a later point. But you know, there still is so much that we don't know about the kind of, you know, how it just tastes like that by the time it gets in the bottle, to keep it, you know, exciting and engaging. And you know, it's just a wondrous time to be in the whiskey industry and the SMWS.
Interesting question there as well on
Yes.
what happens to the whiskey if the panel doesn't think it's ready.
Yep, which does happen every so often, and it does. And that's the one thing I want to tell you as well, that I mean, the industry has changed, as we discussed, over the last 20 years. The society has changed. If you look into history as well, one thing which hasn't changed in the last 20 years since I'm part of the panel is the panel. The panel has not changed. The panel is the people who decide. We're sitting down and we're looking at it, and it's the most important job, I always say, of actually deciding what we're going to bottle, because that's what it is. If we then package it in different labels or different things, that's fine. But what actually is in there, that's important. That's the most important thing. Now, the beauty we have today is, if we don't think it's ready, we can now decide. I mean, in the olden days, I felt like Nero or Caesar in the Colosseum, just thumbs up or thumbs down. Now we can do this, thumbs in the middle, because what we can do, we can decide we leave it longer in that cask. We can decide to re-rack it, or indeed, we can just sell it. Because I can tell you one thing, with the shortage of whiskey in the market, there's no problem selling a cask. I mean, you can sell it within a minute because someone's going to look after it. So someone wants it for a blend or for something else. So that's where we're going. Most of the things we're doing these days would be then on the re-racking it, keeping it for another 2 or 3 years. But the panel will get these casks always back. I never know that it's been re-racked, because I look at it just as a single individual cask. And then I look at it, I nose it, I'll taste it, and I'll make my decision accordingly as well again. So it is, I'm not going to say, I mean, like we've had the boutique company, there are other companies as well. They all do good whiskies as well. They all do great whiskies, but there is one thing which is very different in the society. Well, there's two things which are very different. The panel, because that is what makes the society tick. And number two, we are a society. So we are people coming together, and we're coming together in members' rooms, be it in the Vaults, be it at Queen Street, be it at Bath Street, be it down in London. We do members' tastings all around the UK as well, all around Europe, and certainly globally as well. And the one thing which is important for me, when people say to me, how do you drink your whiskey? Is it with water, without water, with ice, with no ice, with whatever? I say the most important thing is to drink, or the best way to drink whiskey is with friends. And that's what it's about in the society, is sitting together and having a wonderful, good time.
Couldn't agree more, Wally.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Slange to that.
And on that note, gentlemen, it's been a complete pleasure. To everyone who's joined in, I'm sorry we haven't answered all your questions. We'll go through tomorrow and make sure that we answer the ones that haven't been answered on this tasting. If you want to let us know in the comments which ones were your favourite, we were going to ask that question, but we're a bit short on time now. But we'd love to hear it. And equally, if you're tuning in after the fact, please let us know what you've thought of this tasting, what you've thought of the whiskies, and if you have any questions, we'll come back and try and answer them. But in the meantime, thank you to Andrew, thank you to everyone else who's helped behind the scenes, thank you to Olaf and Conas. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm gonna cheers.
See you soon sometime.
See you soon. I've got a few messages, but I'll cheers you for the moment.
Cheers, Matt.
Cheers. So there's plenty more to get involved in with the society. So keep an eye on smws.com/events and also smws.eu/events. And keep an eye on your emails, as there's plenty coming up, including the March outturn, which lands this Friday at 9 a.m. More on that to come. Don't forget to use your voucher code if you're interested in any of the flavour profiles we've tried tonight. And thank you so much for joining us. Wish you a good night. Cheers.